Yeah? Just the ones that really make the final calls, the final shots, I guess. Right? I have never seen such a small panel ever. Anyway, welcome, Excellencies. Your Excellency, Dr. Debretsion Gabriel-Mikhail, Minister of MCIT, and Your Excellency, Dr. Iyasu Abraham, Minister of Agriculture and Natural Resources. We were supposed to have 3 more ministers. We might be joined by them in a few minutes, but if not, we'll go ahead with what we have. And Mission Director Leslie Reed as well. I was informed she may not make it, but if she does, she will join us later as well from USAID. I don't know if I have never met him, so if I have Miraf Gabriel Marcos from ATA, do I have him here? Yes. Awesome, excellent. Actually, I've met him before, I just didn't know his name. Welcome, Ato Miraf. And of course, for this session, we have 2 very, very important people that have done so much of the work behind the scene. That is Mr. Jordan Fabianski. He is the Associate Partner and Country Director for Dahlberg Consultancy. And his partner, we have Ms. Robin Miller. She is Partner at Dahlberg and Global Technology Practice Leader. Ladies and gentlemen, it's with a great honor that I once again, on the 5th day in the closing session of this MCIT ICT EXPO 2017 Ethiopia, an extraordinary event. It's quite an honor for me to be standing here and to say welcome to you. Although we're not a lot, but our round of applause can be a lot. So let's give ourselves a round of applause. I feel really proud of you. Earlier we were talking with Ato Siyum, President of the ICT Association, and the Director of the ICT section, Ato Troma. We were talking about how successful this event has been. And a gentleman from the US, I don't know, he mentioned Fairfax. I don't have the details. Oh, there he is. He was really, really excited, the man right behind you, yes. He was really excited. He was talking to Ato Troma earlier. He was saying this was an amazingly well-organized event. He said he has seen so many of these events for over 45 years in the US, but he thinks this is quite an exceptional event. So I think you should give yourselves a round of applause to Troma, to Siyum, and Dr. Debretsion. Your office people, you need to be acknowledged. You did a great job. And this country, I think we are grateful to have people like yourselves who actually go extra miles. Ato Troma was telling me he was not sleeping any of these days. And I'm sure many of you were not sleeping. So we need determined people, determined leaders like that if this country has to go any further than where it is. So thank you so much. And I would like to say thank you to everyone who has contributed to this event throughout these 5 past days. The moderators and the presenters and the very interesting people like Dr. Corderio. I don't know if he's here. I haven't seen him. I've been talking about the 2045 thing everywhere I went in the past few days. It's quite exciting. So thank you all so much for contributing for the betterment of this country. We are honored to have you with us. So we opened this wonderful expo on the 28th of June, and we had very interesting sessions on that first day. We had His Excellency Mr. Minister opening us officially, and we had presentations by Dr. Corderio and Noah Samara, and of course Leslie Reed from the USAID. So ICT Expo 2017 wrap-up session today. We're here. We're going to probably make the final calls, and you know, this is a wrap-up session for the 4 panels in the past 4 days. These panels, conferences, side events, they all had their own purposes, including the one that happened yesterday, I was told, the academic conference with about 300 participants. That was really exceptional. So this is a high-level wrap-up session where we're going to have our ministers and decision makers and presenters and ICT experts and donor organizations. We're going to all come together to make the final call, to talk about the way forward. What should we do? And the way forward should focus on how do we capitalize on the opportunities we have regarding ICT. And questions such as how do we deal with the challenge that we have already in our tables? And a high number of youths, I was told, have visited this expo. It was amazing. A lot of young people have been inspired, exceptionally inspired. And if we want to make use of this productive part of the society, the youth, we have to give them what they want. would they like, would they understand better. I myself am doing a small agricultural project. I was telling His Excellency Dr. Iyasu in an agricultural, in a pest control conference in Awasa 2 weeks ago, and they were amazed that I'm a city boy, but I'm doing agriculture myself. And they were saying like, it's amazing that you have the energy to do this. I drive 60 kilometers every day outside Addis. I have a small garlic farm where I am growing garlic in 1 hectare land. And it's a serious challenge, but I'm looking at the future. I'm saying, you know, why not? Why can we not try everything? You know, by the end of the day, what we want to do is grow. What we want to do is develop. What we want to do is have enough, you know, to live our lives. And there's the opportunity everywhere, in every direction. But now the youth, they have their own interests. And IT takes their interest a lot. So MCIT and the ICT Expo, that's what they're doing. That's what you did in these 5 days. You inspired a lot of young people, I was told. And we need to take advantage of that. You know, the government is investing a lot in infrastructure. How do we use ICT to make the best use of these infrastructures? How does ICT contribute to agriculture, modernizing our culture, which is the major part of the economic drive in this country? There's hundreds of millions of dollars that are invested in infrastructure. How do we make the best use of ICT and getting the best out of these infrastructures? Agriculture, finance, health. We live in a country of 100 million people. It's very important that we focus on all these people in terms of using ICT and helping them get where they want to get to, you know, and the future is really bright. So, with that, I'm going to go say thank you so much once again to our sponsors who made this event possible. I really think they are the most important part of this event because, you know, without money we can't do anything, and they paid for everything. So we're going to take our time and say thank you to them and recognize them. So in the platinum section, we have Ethio Telecom, Techno Mobile, and Huawei Mobile. And in our silver sponsorship section, we have US Government Aid for International Development, USAID, and we have Yazmi USA, the technology provider. And we have the bronze sponsors, Cent, Cisco, Digital Africa Telecom, Kafia Financial Technologies, and ZTE, and Deloitte, and Simon. And our partners are Oracle and MasterCard. And our official career is the one and only Ethiopian Airlines. And our media partner, right in the back, is EBS Television. And our hospitality sponsors are Jupiter International Hotel, Ambassador Hotel, and Sapphire Addis Hotel. And very special thanks goes to Kafia Financial Technologies, ATA, the Agricultural Transformation Agency, USAID, the US Agency for International Development, and Ministry of Education. They have sponsored all the panels in the past 5 days, and we need to really honor them for what they have done. And finally, I don't like the cliche last but not least, but I have already mentioned them in the beginning. Amongst us, we have here these people that have given everything they have together from the very beginning with MCIT, organizing this event, making sure they find and spot the right panelists and the right presenters, the right experts and moderators from all around the world, people that have so much to offer and who have offered so much in these past 5 days. They have identified our panelists. These are the people sitting right in the left corner up front next to the ministers. That is Jordan and Robin. They are from Dahlberg Consultancy. Please give them a round of applause. And with that, I'm going to call upon Jordan first, who's going to come here and do a presentation of what you've been doing and what you've come up with in the past 4 days of the panels. And then later on, his partner Robin will join him. And then when we finish their presentation, we'll call upon our ministers up here for the panel, and then you'll have an open discussion, which will be again moderated by the two. Please welcome Jordan to the stage for me now.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you all very much. I'll briefly introduce myself and say a bit more briefly about Dahlberg. My name is Jordan Fabianski. I'm the country director of Dahlberg here in Ethiopia. Globally, I lead what we call our inclusive growth practice, which houses our strategic advisory work in the public sector. Dahlberg is a management consulting company globally, but what makes us special is that we focus exclusively on issues of international development. And so when we were approached by Atoseum and Atoteshome about supporting the National ICT Expo and Conference, we were very excited because technology for development, ICT for development, is a topic that we care deeply about and it has been our privilege to contribute to that process. I'll briefly say, over the last few days, as you know, the central theme of this conference was to expose, to enable, and to engage. And in all three respects, this expo and conference has been a tremendous success. We've exposed a number of existing success stories where ICT is already gaining traction and contributing to development objectives, and we've exposed opportunities where we can push the needle even further. We've discussed how ICT can be an enabler and what would be enablers of ICT to better contribute to those objectives. And lastly, and perhaps maybe the main focus of this morning, is how do we engage, and questions of what are actions that we can take going forward. So Atoteshome invited us, the Dahlberg team, to present what we heard over the last few days in order to tee up a more lengthy discussion among your excellencies from respective ministries and sectors and your expertise areas to reflect on where do we go from here. So in a way, this is to provide a kind of foundation of facts that emerged from the last several days. With that, I'll go through each of those objectives in turn. So the first is, as you know, the last several days have been organized around 4 sector focus areas. That's in digital finance and e-payments, ICT for agriculture, e-health and mobile health, and e-learning and digital jobs. And what we heard in the last several days is that there are concrete examples in each of these areas where ICT solutions are already achieving some form of development impact. And while these are not an exhaustive list of concrete examples, they showcase really the diversity of actions that are already ongoing. I'll list a few. In digital finance and e-payments, as many of you know, there have been early experimentations with solutions like mobile money in the form of Ember and Hello Cash. There have been studies completed, sponsored by DFID and others, focused on how transaction pools in the country could be digitized. Where are those new opportunities? And most perhaps recently, there's been the development of a national financial inclusion strategy which has a strong digital pillar. Those are all examples of the thinking that's taking place, but also concrete experimentations. In agriculture, as many of you know, recent success examples include the broad reach of the national SMS and interactive voice recognition system, IVR, to deliver farmer extension services to farmers. The example of the national voucher system, which is undergoing a process of digitization and is already active now in 5 woredas and considering ways that it can expand its scope of services to include improvements in access to credit, among other kinds of financial services for farmers. Among other examples, including those led by ACX, Digital Green, and other development partners. In the health space, there are a number of early examples of ICT contributing to development impact, again, non-exhaustive. The Federal Ministry of Health and the Gates Foundation have entered into what's called the Data Use Partnership, involving JSI and other development partners, in exploring how to create a culture of data use in the health sector, from the rural health post all the way up to the ministry. There are current efforts to digitize the family folder. There are efforts to use satellite-based dissemination of training materials to health extension workers. The SMS system is being used to make announcements about health burdens and to provide kind of preventative measures for the public, among many other examples, including those that are still under development through the e-health and m-health strategies of the ministry. And finally, in education, we heard examples of innovation from a wide range of partners on the Friday afternoon sessions, including the launch of multiple web portals and partnerships for e-learning in the country, the introduction of academies that will certify trained students with software skills, but also more basic digital skills to prepare graduates to enter the workforce and to be employed in digital jobs, but also to bring digital skills to a whole range of other kinds of jobs. And lastly, we've heard a number of efforts to localize educational content using technology so that it is more tailored to the Ethiopian context. In addition to all of the above, we also heard that there is a wide range of cross-cutting success examples, including the development of a national ICT policy and strategy, the organization and capacitation of the Ministry of Communications and Information Technology with its supporting directorates and programs, the work of Ethio Telecom, of course, in expanding the national terrestrial network, the establishment of the ICT Village, an industrial park located just south of Addis Ababa, and its supporting environment for attracting investment in the sector, and the partnership between INSA and Eutelsat focused on bringing greater access to satellite services in the country. Again, non-exhaustive, but really speaks to the progress that is already underway and that this conference really served to shed light upon. In these same 4 areas, the last several days also drew attention to a number of opportunities to extend the impact of work that's being done and to address needs that are not yet being addressed. In digital finance and e-payments, we heard examples of introducing a digital platform for consumer-to-business remittance payments for utilities, microinsurance, and educational expenses and others. And there's already motion in that direction, including the recent announcement of the partnership between Kafia and MasterCard on Wednesday. We've heard the opportunity of mapping further those largest transaction pools in the country and designing for each of those pools what is an appropriate digital solution in order to reduce transaction costs and otherwise improve the efficiency in transacting and moving away from cash to a more cash-light system. In agriculture, there are a wide range of examples that highlighted during the agricultural panels on Friday morning, including, for example, extending the impact of the current system with the tens of millions of users of the national SMS IVR system. The question came, how can we include other kinds of services in that existing platform? Could its scope of services be enhanced to provide farmers with access to information about health issues, about issues of access to finance, among other kinds of issues? We heard that there's an opportunity to continue making the services delivered through these ICT channels even more farmer-centric. And Digital Green had expressed its commitment to continuing to take a much more farmer-centric approach to its work, so designing solutions that are comprehensive in addressing the needs that farmers face. And lastly, we heard the opportunity of ICT solutions being leveraged in rural areas to empower youth and to help prepare youth to enter the workforce in a variety of different ways. In health, much of the opportunity was summed up in continuing to build that culture of data use. And that has a number of facets, raising awareness about the value of having data and contributing data and what we can do when we've gathered data from rural health posts with the use of analytic capabilities that could be established at the ministry level. There were points about introducing an SMS-based system to support referrals so that patients can quickly access the health care that they need after going through the diagnostic stage. And we heard examples of designing a national health system, an agent-based system to enable users to obtain the prescriptions that they need through certified channels. And lastly, of course, is the opportunity to roll out the strategy for telemedicine and to extend the impact of the big ideas that are already floating in the ministry for ICT to contribute to health. In education, the examples were many. They include examples ranging widely from the development of content that is localized and catered to the needs of Ethiopian youth in particular. They included examples of digital solutions that can help prepare people to enter the workforce with the digital skills they need for employment, but also digital solutions that can help with the matchmaking process between job seekers and employers that are looking for talented youth to join their companies. They included digital platforms for employers to raise awareness about the kinds of skills that they're looking for, and to signal to the educational system, but also to candidates that are looking for employment in the future, to focus on the skills that they will need in order to have a job and secure a job when they graduate. So these are all to say that there's great progress being made, but there are opportunities looking forward. Now, I do want to draw attention to a number of the challenges that emerged, but I won't dwell on those challenges, but rather think ahead to what does it really mean for where we go from here, and start to beg some questions for this group to consider about the concrete actions that could come out of this discussion. You might think, in fact, of the challenges that emerged across the panel discussions as the tip of an iceberg. In a sense, we can't address every single challenge with a direct solution immediately, and we need to prioritize where to go from here. And the real question is how we dig beneath the surface and address the really high leverage actions to go forward. But I will list what those common challenges are. So at the tip of the iceberg, in a way, we heard supply-side challenges in accelerating the delivery of ICT solutions. And these included the challenges of entrepreneurs and SMEs who face a high amount of risk when they're experimenting with new solutions in the space that have a high risk of failure and not facing a safety net. They include the challenges of content not being fully localized to the Ethiopian context, but needing to be further strengthened to be of highest quality in the country. They include the challenge of different efforts just being fragmented, and there needing to be more coordination, and the challenge of when we have talented ICT professionals and when they're trained, the challenge of retaining them and offering them opportunities to remain in Ethiopia. We heard challenges on the demand side, and those include awareness of the services that are available through different ICT challenges, the challenge of the cost of access from an end user perspective, and of course the need to continue extending the penetration of mobile across the country so that all people can access the benefits of services available through mobile. In terms of infrastructure, while ETIO and others continue to make great progress in extending the terrestrial network, there are challenges of the high cost of expanding that network into remote rural areas. And with that, then, is the question, how do we provide access to alternative channels for ICT services, including infrastructure in terms of satellite? There's also questions of how we provide the right data infrastructure on the government side so that we learn what's working well and what needs further improvement, and how we collect that data and share, disseminate the information for a diverse array of partners to plan their initiatives going forward. In terms of business environment, firms have highlighted the difficulty of navigating who to go to for what across different ministries. We've heard questions of how standards and regulations can continue to be further optimized, which is, of course, a current priority of the ministry. And we heard that while there are matters of information security and data protection are of high priority on the government side, we heard that there's uncertainty among the private players about what those priorities are and how best to accommodate them as they plan their initiatives going forward. And lastly, there were questions about how ICT solutions can be more inclusive but also more sustainable. And that includes the question of how we consider different kinds of segments of end users or personas. So, for example, the consideration of women, a point was raised on Thursday that women in Ethiopia are much more likely to inherit their mobile device from one of the men in their family, and much less likely to have a smartphone phone and more likely to have a feature phone. So what are the implications of that for how we think about extending the reach of ICT services across the country? And in terms of sustainability, a common point emphasized was that all different kinds of partners in this effort, if they want to move beyond pilot stage, need to be thinking about what is a sustainable business model for their initiatives. So how to scale up ICT solutions so that we can avoid that the adage that one panelist shared with us on Friday, that pilots never fail, but pilots never scale. Now, again, it's important to move past these challenges and think on the positive side, really, what do we do with this? And are there, you could call them levers or leverage points for improvement, where we can get the highest amount of impact for the amount of effort that we put in the shortest amount of time. Now, what I'll present here are what we heard over the last several days as suggestions that came from a wide range of different panelists and expertise and backgrounds. They're really you could say, a prompt for this group's consideration and discussion, and I'll run through them quickly, but simply to sort of set the stage. The first, they fall into four categories. The first is there were shifts in how we think about ICT and how we think about ICT for development. There were shifts in how we plan, suggestions for how we improve planning for ICT to better contribute to development goals, shifts in how we work together, a number of suggestions for partnership, and lastly, shifts in how we think about reaching scale when we have successful pilots that just whose impact needs to be extended. So running through, a major shift in how we think was suggested that we need to move from a supply side and technology or service-centric approach to a more human-centric and end-user-centric approach, and design solutions that are tailored to the needs of end users, like farmers in the agriculture sector, for example, solutions that are more integrated. We heard the opportunity to shift from a focus on sector-specific initiatives to initiatives that are platform-based, right? And imagining not just how the SMS IVR system can create value in an agricultural sense, but could create value in terms of contributing to health outcomes and financial inclusion outcomes, among others. And lastly, we heard the importance of ICT being mainstreamed. That ICT, in a sense, is an enabler of all of the other ministries in their development goals. And so the question is, how best can we work together in order for ICT solutions to be taken up in those different sectors? Now, that has, of course, implications for how we plan. The first being that there could be an opportunity to shift towards a more demand-led approach to ICT. In other words, the sector and line ministries and other spaces, in a sense, defining what is the agenda for ICT to better contribute to the country's overall development targets. We heard the opportunity to better ensure that initiatives have a clear business model. In the stage of planning where we're developing new policy direction, setting strategy, developing plans, but when we get to initiatives, do we have a theory for how initiatives will scale? Right? Do we have a theory for how they will crowd in investment and support from development partners, from private investors, and others? And then thirdly, the point was raised about strengthening the capacity of the Ministry of Communications and Information Technology so that it can provide those valuable services to other ministries and enable their development objectives. In terms of partnership, collaboration, a number of participants over the last few days highlighted that a forum for dialogue convened regularly, not just once a year in the form of an expo, could provide for a productive discussion of the day-to-day bottlenecks people face in reaching scale. But importantly, to complement that kind of forum, there could be an opportunity for a sort of think tank to interpret what's being said, to provide and feed information back to senior leadership on the government side on where we go with that information, and then later follow up with those participants. We heard the point about promoting an innovation culture, creating safe space for innovators, SMEs to pilot new projects. And we heard the point about strengthening the business models for the incubation and acceleration of SMEs that are experimenting in the ICT sector. In particular, this was highlighted yesterday in the startup discussion as important for empowering youth and raising the awareness of young entrepreneurs about ways in which they could experiment in the ICT sector and ways that they could be given safe space to pursue an entrepreneurial initiative. And then lastly, it was highlighted that in order to strengthen the ways in which different government actors are working together, there could be benefits in the provision of guidelines for how information about the ICT sector is shared across different ministries, in order to accelerate that communication and information flow, and therefore improve the planning process. And in terms of scale, we heard that one key success factor for reaching scale was to attract the resources and the expertise of private investors, especially international private investors. Already there's early success in the establishment of the ICT village, and now the question was, what are the incentives or the enabling environment that would attract larger and larger and skilled, experienced global investors to enter that space, and importantly, not just enter, attracted by the incentives, but link backward to the domestic economy and create jobs for SMEs here, and to transfer their knowledge to local firms. We also heard the importance of creating demand, that one of the challenges of scaling up some pilot projects was that often the end user, could be the farmer or the patient, was not aware of what are the benefits of having mobile access, or what other kinds of services that they could benefit from if they did have, if they're already benefiting from one type of service. So for example, if they have access to information about market data in the agriculture sector, but were unaware of the benefits of having access to other information, which could then, if there was demand created, inspire more innovation on the private sector side. And then lastly, we heard that this is a continuous improvement process. The relevant systems and standards will shift over time as technology advances and as the needs of the country shift with progress. And that requires some form of continuous attention to opportunities to upgrade the systems that are in place or to shift and raise the standard when appropriate. Now, in each of these dimensions, how we think, plan, work together, and how we scale up, there were a number of data points surfaced in the last several days from past experience here in Ethiopia and also international experience, as many of our panelists came from, were drawing on their experience working in other countries. I won't go through all of those data points because there were so many, but I will highlight at least what we sensed were some of the key lessons or success factors that emerged from those international and past experiences, and I'll summarize just the 4 key points on the next page. Across these 4 areas, there are really the 4, you could say, success factors that were suggested by panelists in the last several days were, number 1, a demand-led approach, for, in a sense, the ministry to be responsive, the Ministry for Communications and Information Technology, responsive to the development goals of other line ministries, and to consider in what ways are those other sectors and line ministries helping to set the agenda for ICT solutions to contribute to the country's overall goals. We heard a success factor around the ecosystem framework. So a lot of participants described the importance of knowing who's who in the ecosystem and who's doing what. So in other words, clarifying that landscape of actors, public sector and private, and defining what is the implicit process today and what is the target or envisioned process for how we work together going forward. The third point we heard was the importance of shifting from sector-specific initiatives to a more platform-centric approach or cross-sector platform-based approach. The examples here ranged widely. I've mentioned SMS IVR several times, but there are many other types of platforms that exist today, but whose value really could be extended across other sectors. Satellite being one example. Digital ID was another example cited, and there are many others. And then lastly, there was a question about delivery capacity. We know in a number of other countries that ministries responsible for ICT, but also in other sectors, have capacitated themselves with the kinds of skills that they need to be responsive to needs emerging across other sectors. And here in Ethiopia, there's also a number of ministries that are beginning to establish that kind of accelerated delivery capacity at a senior level in order to shepherd signature initiatives and system-wide reforms on a demand-led basis. So the question then comes, what could that look like in the context of ICT? Now, I've said a lot. And I have to caveat what I've presented as this was our small team's gathering of notes and our synthesis of insights over the last several days as we heard from all of these different panel discussions. But there were many side discussions and other insights that emerged over the course of the conference that we didn't hear directly ourselves. So actually, before we move on, I'd like to invite the other moderators who are present to please raise their hand. First, we have, fantastic, so we have 1, 2, we have 6, 7. We have almost all right, moderators and some panelists. In that case, I would like to open it up. For those of you, especially the moderators who are facilitating those discussions, did I miss anything? Are there points that you would underscore or emphasize, or points that you would add in?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Devang Sanji, and I moderated the education panel. I think Jordan summarized the key findings really well. Maybe the one point that I wanted to emphasize was the point that he's making around cross-sectoral collaboration. So if we think about the panel itself, the first half of the panel focused not on ICT at all, but actually just on education. What are issues in the education sector? And then in the second half of the panel, we started talking about how can ICT help with some of those. As an example within that, an education problem anywhere and everywhere is a teacher problem. Teachers drive most of the quality outcomes in an education system, and they usually are the largest cost. Something like 60% of education costs anywhere are teachers. And if you look across the continent, there's a shortage of something like 400,000 teachers across the entire continent. And so as you begin to solve that problem of a shortage of teachers, usually you then begin to focus ICT solutions not so much on students or laptops in the hands of students or something on those lines, but actually talking about how can you use ICT to be able to train teachers at a much faster pace, because that usually is a very large part of the cost. And I believe Ethiopia does have a good program around that, and certainly expanding that program would be one solution. But then the second and more interesting part that we started talking about was the changing nature of the classroom, and how, because a lot of content is now free, a lot of content is available online, there's obviously an opportunity to localize a lot of that content. But the role of the teacher is changing from a content expert to becoming much more of a facilitator. And that begins to provide really good takeaways or interventions for teachers as well, because you no longer need to train a teacher to be a content expert, which used to take 3 to 5 years depending on what you were trying to achieve. But actually, all the content is available online. It may be available for free, and the teaching that is required is maybe teaching as a facilitator, which may be only a year's course or a year and a half course. So you have the ability to actually use ICT to begin to say, what is the biggest problem that this particular sector is facing, and how can ICT solve that specific problem? And that was the core of our discussion. So it was well covered in Jordan's presentation, but I wanted to emphasize that as a key takeaway.
Good morning. My name is Pazian Chernet. I moderated the healthcare, the digital health, the second portion of it. My friend Solomon moderated the first one. In both panels, lots of good working models were explored, and also we reviewed and evaluated what was tried, particularly around mHealth, and different initiatives were explored. One thing that we realized in the healthcare domain, it's heavily influenced and governed by Ministry of Health and the donor organization. And when we think of ICT and innovation, particularly considering the global trend and what exactly happened in the world, the private sector plays a significant amount of role to master ideas and develop different solutions and try and further try, fail, get up and execute. And in that way, any type of innovation were expedited across the globe. But here in Ethiopia, there is one area of opportunity, I would say, instead of difficulty. An opportunity to have conversation across the board between ministry organization, donor organizations, and also the private sector. Now, this health sector transformation plan is amazing. It's a great roadmap. But when you really bring it down to a practical level, it requires tremendous amount of skill by all stakeholders, from patients and physicians and everybody that involves within that sector. Now, we have a larger percentage of our population is just youth, and IT is growing, but it has to be organized in such a manner that opportunities are opening up, conversations are possible across the board. And in that way, innovation can be facilitated both vertical and horizontal manner. Now, one suggestion that came out of our panel was, is it possible to set up some kind of think tank or some kind of forum that happens regularly? It could be monthly or quarterly, so that these stakeholders will come together and explore opportunities and possibilities. And that is something probably I would also like to request our leaders if such initiative can be facilitated across the board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Solomon Casa. I moderated, excuse me, digital health, and I also took part in a tech startup, which I was most interested in. And there was very, very interesting topic that was raised at the tech startup discussion yesterday. Levi did a wonderful job moderating, actually. So one of the main things that was raised by the audience was around regulation, policy making, and standards. So this is not only MCIT's issue or problem or responsibility, because ICT is just an enabler, and then we try to affect or impact many other sectors or areas. So I think I was surprised not to see the regulation and policy issues among the common challenges. So this is kind of a question, what has been done around that, because regulation can be in multiple areas, financial, telecom, procurement, and many others. So what is the officials' response or opinion or insight around that, because that can really stifle the speed of the ICT enabling the economy and in many other areas. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I moderated the digital finance. It's just a note, I think, for Jordan, that though the capturing of the discussions and interactions of the past few days has been done well, we need to be careful on the projections of the data because of the time constraint. Some of the factors that you have put up might not be as accurate in terms of data or what is actually the fact on the ground. So I think the purpose is for discussion. So you should give it a caveat to say this is part of a discussion, not data accuracy.
Yeah, and I think that makes for a great segue in fact. And I think earlier I misspoke in saying that this is a common foundation of facts or data. In fact, this is a foundation of diverse perspectives and opinions that came up over the last several days and that we've done our best to play back. But really, where we go from here is not suggested in this presentation. It is the topic for discussion this morning, and one that we just want to prompt as we move ahead. Do we have time for, yeah? Terrific. Maybe one or two just more comments. Go ahead.
Okay, hi, my name is Levy, and I moderated the startup. I was actually quite surprised by what I saw. And I didn't expect that there was such a gap between the youth and MCIT and ICT and the various organizations. So, I mean, these startups are based in Addis Ababa, and they are not aware of the incubation program at MCIT. They're unaware of ICT COE, ICE, Blue Moon, etc. So this information gap actually threw me off. We've already, as part of the collaboration between ICT and MCIT, we've already started looking at the issues of the startup community. But then, I think what we've done is we've basically taken feedback from a few organizations. So there has to be, I think we also have to look internally as to how we can expand that. There must be, not everybody who develops apps actually went to university. So there are these people, these young folks who maybe finished 10th grade and are developing apps, so they won't know about these various opportunities because they're not exposed. So what we're saying is basically, I think for the rural community and also for the people here, we have to look at ways to actually engage them. There is an absolute gap, and that gap has to be closed. And the gap is primarily about awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Good morning. I was a moderator yesterday at one of the academic presentations, and the panelists at Digital Health. There were really very mature and very thorough presentations on different technologies. The one that I moderated focused on e-learning. E-learning both in a hybrid or in pure e-learning, and how it's been underutilized in here. So I think that's one major area that we need to explore, discuss further. There was also a very amazing and very good presentation on 5G technologies. What we have today in 4G technologies in Ethiopia and all over the world, it's because of the demand of this new need for data from device-to-device communication, IoT, and things like that. 5G is becoming a dominant technology, even though it's still in the lab. So that's one area I think that needs to be discussed. On the panel that I participated, the digital health, I think one major issue presented by the presenters, including myself, was this fragmented landscape in the health information system in Ethiopia. All the different development partners, they have their own silo solutions, not integrated. They do not work together, and that's not sustainable. For any HMIS or any digital initiative, for that matter, to be successful in any country, the role of the private sector is critical. Not critical, indispensable. The development sector, development community, by very nature, are very tactical. They're not strategic. Strategically, what we need to focus is really an alliance between the government, academia, and the private sector. That is only guarantor of sustainable IT ecosystem in any country. Thank you.
Fantastic. We'll take one more comment from Etosio, please. Yeah.
Hi, good morning. My name is Siyum. I moderated the private sector session yesterday. There were so many issues, recommendations on that particular session. But one of the things which caught my attention is that one of the panelists mentioned about the success stories about, on health extension, agriculture extension, and he mentioned, why not have an ICT extension? Because that will reach out to the many in the countryside. That's a way to promote ICT across the nation. So we should discuss that as a good model to kind of capitalize on the existing discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Etosium. So I will close this summary presentation as I want to transition to a more lively discussion and involve our guests of honor this morning. But before I do, let me just say a great thank you and expression of appreciation to all of our moderators in particular again, and I ask if we could join in just giving them a quick round of applause. Now, this is a summary presentation to inform what we're calling a wrap-up roundtable discussion, but wrap-up really is the wrong word to describe what this is. It's the beginning of a conversation rather than the end of one. And with that, I'm looking forward to discussing where do we go from here? What are concrete actions that can follow in the coming months and in the coming years? In order to introduce the next session, yes. My colleague Robin and I will join in facilitating the next discussion, but I'll leave to you to introduce. Thanks so much.
Okay, please thank him for me. Thank you so much. That was an extensive work you've done, and probably Robin will add a few more points later on. I just wanted quickly, as a bridge, to share what I've seen in New York City a few months ago. They have these things they call cars to go, like coffee to go or manam. They're very small. Many of you have been to New York, I'm sure, and you know what I mean. These are very tiny cars, two-seat cars. You have seen them in Addis as well, smart cars. And they are taxis in America. And what they do is, they just park them along the road, and then you take your credit card, open them, hop in there, drive them anywhere you want within a 36 square mile radius, and park them wherever you go, and just pay with your card and leave the cars. You don't even have to worry about parking, returning the car from where you to where you found it. You see, this is what amazing things ICT can do for us. And well, we have moved from the Blue Devil taxis to the yellow meter taxis now. And very soon, with expos like that, what comes out of expos like these, we can move on to cars to go. Why not? ICT is really, really very important. And we pay only 40. I was amazed. We pay only 41 cents plus tax per mile in New York for these cars to go. This is really, really wonderful. You don't have to talk to anybody. You just go into the cars. You find them anywhere around you. You open them, drive them, park them properly where you go, and then just leave them. And go do your thing. It's really amazing. So we're going to go to this open session now, but I'm going to call upon His Excellency Dr. Debrezion Gabriel-Mikhail, Minister of MCIT, to come here and take a seat. Please welcome him for me. And then directly from a flight, that's the love of the job, that's commitment. I have amongst us the Minister of Agriculture and Natural Resources, Dr. Iyasu Abra, who just joined us straight from his flight. Please welcome him with a round of applause. And then I will call upon Ato Miraf Gabriel Marcos. He's a Senior Director of Agribusiness Markets and Enhanced Implementation Capacity at ATA. Please welcome him for me. And then, of course, Jordan and Robin will join us as well. Please welcome him for me. Yeah, the other way around is better. Yes. Jordan should be here, maybe? Okay, so we will open this for an open discussion now, and I'll be running the mic.
Welcome, and thank you, Your Excellencies. And Ato Miraf, thank you for joining us this morning. Yes. Now, before, we want to make this a lively discussion and look forward to inviting some questions from the audience. Before we do, I thought what we might do is run down this line First with the question from each of your individual perspectives, where you see the opportunity, having heard what was presented this morning and reflecting on the last several days, and where you see is the success factor. What will it take going forward? Just your own opening remarks and perspective to help frame this discussion. And then I'll ask my colleague, Robin, the question, what questions should we be asking generally from an international perspective, and having worked in other countries where governments have struggled with the question, how do we enable our development agenda with ICT? What are those questions we can be asking ourselves as we go forward? So with that, I'll pass to Your Excellency, Dr. Debretsion.
Good morning. Well, first, I will not be very specific in responding to your question. I just want to approach it in a different way, because there are several findings that I have seen. So I will start from the findings I have already seen on the wrap-up discussion. I just want to comment a bit, and then I will go back to your question. Again, before I go to some of the points I would like to raise on the wrap-up, I would like to appreciate all of you for the contribution you have already made. I feel this ICT Expo is a big success, but I think we will deepen the lessons that we have learned from this event, and we'll further see how we can continue having such platforms. So we will have a platform for further evaluation, and we have to also go through the detailed learnings that we have to take so that we can build on it. As you all know, this expo is how to make Ethiopia digital. You cannot make Ethiopia digital in one expo. It's a journey by its own. But we have already started by focusing on 4 areas. But the whole area is to make Ethiopia digital. And there are a lot of areas that we need to look into. But as I said, this is a success by its own, because it has its own scope. But for me, it's a beginning. This is just a beginning, even on the 4 areas that we have identified. For the sake of completeness, and of course, it will also guide us for the next steps that you have already raised. I need to raise some areas of concern that we need to incorporate. But as Munir was saying earlier, there are things that we have to complete. It's not about only data. There are analysis that we have to deepen on the findings. This is a short, although there were papers that have been presented. We need to go much further, because the agenda is again about digital Ethiopia. It's not about addressing some issues. So it's a very comprehensive challenge. We have already started it by the expo and by these discussions. So we have to deepen. So actually it's related also with the question, we have to deepen for other success. We have to deepen the findings that we have tried to articulate on these 4 areas. It's just to, as I say, to raise some highlights. I'm not going to the details, because I just have seen it here and from your presentations. On the area, well, the successes, I think you have already more or less addressed, but it can be deepened later on the 4 areas. On opportunities, there are areas that we have to include. Actually, it should be also part of the solution, especially in the rural community. We have launched in the rural qabeles in the whole Ethiopia to establish ICT communication service centers. this program was launched last April, not 2017, but 2016. So we have already addressed nearly 1,800 villages. These are centers not only for ICT, but for other services, postal service, secretarial service, and other, like voucher card. You are raising issues of access and, of course, infrastructure. We say one of the gaps that we have to fill is there must be some centers that function like intermediary, because the infrastructure is already there, but there is no usage. There is a gap. So for me, one of the main challenge as we speak is usage of the infrastructure. Also, we have to do more on the quality of the infrastructure, partly access, but the already covered areas are not being used. So we have networks, but we are not putting them into use. So the users we are organizing at every village is to address this gap. These centers are actually business centers, but are owned by TVET graduates users that live in the village. So they are local, and they have some education. So they can work as intermediary, but at the same time it is business for them, because they are not employees of the ministry or Ethio Telecom. It's just business. So we are trying to incubate business at the rural centers. So this is, in a way, opportunity, because we are just starting, but at the same time we have to work also by considering this area. And this is one of the, there are details into this. It has its own business model. I don't want to go into it because that's not the subject, but I just want to highlight, because this is one of the basic intervention that can change the landscape, especially at the rural villages. This will completely change the usage of ICT. But it's more than ICT. They will provide other services. On the challenges across the teams, generally I have recognized them and I appreciate the contribution, but we have to deepen. Some of the challenges can be mixed. I feel I see them some redundancy, but at the same time we can also bring other issues within the challenges. So I have identified 2-3 areas of challenge across the teams that we can improve. I just want to comment, but this will be part of the assignment that I will suggest later on, by the way. But there are areas that we have to improve, and actually we have to rephrase even some of the statements, because it may not describe the way we live in our situation. So we'll improve some of them. As I said, usage and digital literacy is one of the serious challenges. You know, even smartphones are in the village, but they don't use it. Even farmers are owning, a smart village, these smartphones. In fact, in some of the areas, hoping that the network will come. Hoping. Or in some cases, during market days, say, usually they go to some towns, they will use it there. But when they go back, it's blank. But they have this big apparatus of no usage. And in some of the areas where we have the network, they don't use it. They see pictures. Through pictures, they communicate. But there are many things that it's not innovation, but at least to bridge the digital literacy. As I said, they are trying many just funny things. So the digital literacy should have been properly captured. When you see, not only actually it's a village, but the village is the extreme case, even in towns. Digital literacy is one of the serious issues that we should address, and I didn't see it. It was not captured at all. It was not captured at all. That's why I say there are some mix that we combine and then also articulate in a different way. On the improvements that we have actually developed, how we think. By the way, I'm happy with the organization of those ideas, of the levels of our improvement. But we can further discuss next time on the shift that has been articulated, the shift, the mindset from technology and service-centric to human-centric. I don't fully accept, by the way, this shift. And there is not much regarding technology-centric, yes. We should not be technology-centric. But when it comes to service-centric, yes, we should. We should be service-centric. But it should be connected with human-centric. So these are not exclusive. No need of shift. You have to combine service with human-centric. But technology, yes. So I think there must be some clarity on this one. We are not simply shifting from technology and service-centric to human. I don't accept. It does not fully explain the shift that we need. We need to shift from technology-centric to service and human. So we have to combine. But anyone can dialogue. I'm ready to discuss on this, but I just want to reflect because this is a major area improvement that have been spelled out in this improvement. Second point, and within this, how we think, shifting from focus on sector-specific initiative, focus on platforms for cross-sectoral collaboration. Partly, I agree, but I also disagree on the statement. Again, we have to combine. You cannot simply shift from sector to sectoral, this cross-sectoral collaboration. We need both. But cross-sectoral should be given priority when it comes to priority. That is a foundation for all. Otherwise, it's not just a shift. It is about prioritization. So the articulation must be, because it will guide us, it will guide the practice, it will guide our plan. And it should be arranged. It should be arranged on. Actually, these are the measure in terms of the perspectives that we should address. The others are some inputs on. It's about information on lessons and success factors. National innovation, but I just want to say, Ethiopia has a national innovation policy. We have these science and technology innovations, plans, in fact, initiatives, and all are connected with the universities. So we have a very strong, I just want that to be captured as well, because it's not just ICT, it's about the entire innovation. Regarding dialogue, on collaboration, there is some, I don't know, maybe you have reached some conclusion. It says current public-private dialogue in Ethiopia often lacks trust and could be more focused on opportunities vis-a-vis grievances. When I see it from the ICT, it's completely different. It is opposite. There is a big trust. And actually there is no grievance in our platform. So I would have expected Siyum and his team, in fact, to comment on this one. I have never seen such platform on, ICT platform is not of grievance. Actually, it's about collaboration, about working together, and they know it. I would have expected all of you, Levi as well, and others are part of this ICT ministry and ICT platform to address this point. I was not supposed to actually comment, but since it is written, I'm obliged to comment. Otherwise, the people are here, let them comment. There is no grievance. And I really, by the way, I'm happy with the collaboration we have. But on other platform, yes, that's different. That's different. On ICT, it's completely, actually this is a model that we want to replicate even to other sectors. In some cases, I see actually the support coming from ICT ET to MCIT. different from a different direction. They support because they conduct a lot of studies, research, support the government, of course, support the sector. So our relationship is completely different, completely different. This should not have been spelled out like this regarding, because we are focusing on ICT, we have a completely different model and kind of engagement. It does not reflect at all our relationship with the private sector. I tell you, I'm very happy with the relationship we have. In fact, this ICT Expo can also be raised as an example. It's a collaboration work. It's again to work to change the sector. We call it about this digital Ethiopia. So it does not reflect at all. And as I said, it should have been reflected and this should continue. Well, key success factors, I was trying to touch upon many things. The most important is to have the right direction. You have to have the right strategy to change. It's about change. You have to have the right strategy. You have to have the right leadership. I'm coming from the higher level. I'm not going to the details anymore because you said about the success factors. It's about clarity of your vision, your strategy, and then leadership. Then it will come to all this demand-led, and these are some of the details that we have to work on. I better stop before I conclude because there are many, some other points that I would like to highlight finally on how we move forward. Thank you. I went out of the scope, but I just want to address all the issues raised. I don't want to leave it behind.
And I think, and thank you, Your Excellency. I think what your points raised underscore a couple of key takeaways for me, in fact. The first being that this is the beginning of a process, that the conversations in a panel discussion and over the course of several days are a beginning and not the end, and that there's a depth that we need to get into in order to really select appropriate actions going forward. And that depth also requires careful attention to the use of language and reflection on the current reality with hard data rather than just perspectives and opinions as we go forward. You've also underscored a number of points that were not mentioned in the last several days, or at least not according to the notes that we've captured, which is great. And I look forward to hearing also other missing points from the audience as a whole and our fellow panelists so that we can paint the full picture together and include points such as how do we bridge to those most remote rural areas with technology solutions, for example, or take into account issues of digital literacy as a key priority going forward. But thank you very much, Your Excellency. I might next invite Your Excellency, Dr. Iyasu, to please share your reflections in the last several days, and where do you see us going forward? Oh yeah, at least the summary.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning. And simply to reflect and to sell myself also, where the transformation agenda is. Then after that, Meraf can supplement media, where the agriculture sector is very important. I am really happy that you mentioned ICT for agriculture. That's a part of transformation. But in fact, we have to be very curious when we write, when we are still infant also, the policy and directions also. Because we need private sectors, we need cooperatives for transformation. But, if from the beginning it says, it lacks, it makes, a little bit different. Therefore, in general, let me brief you what's agriculture in growth and transformation, 2 minutes. Therefore, where the IT can be important for that purpose. When we say in general agriculture right now means it's growth and transformation too, beyond the food security and nutrition security, the very important role and the vital important role in agriculture is market-led agriculture now. We are shifting from subsistence agriculture to the commercialized agriculture, to the market-led agriculture. Here is the revolution. Here is the ICT very important element. The volume part, the quality part, the time delivery part, the diversity part, is very important, basically. Therefore, IT is an infant, but IT is a very important, and I heard also an extension on IT, and he said, it's good that that comes up now, such kind of, a new and what we call it, a new idea and a new innovations. Therefore, market-led extension means it's based off the IT extension by itself. We have to sell our services. So we have to know where the market is. So it was production-oriented. So now it was production and sell it. But now we sell it before we produce it. Therefore, it's a big shift from one step to the other step. Therefore, I think the policy and the strategies that we have is very important for ICT. That's why we are here. Therefore, this is the first one. The second one is very important element is the agro-processing element, by the way. So we are embarking for about 17 agro-industrial parks right now. So we need an input. By the way, I will give you one example. In Bure, there is a park that needs only factory 2 million metric tons of oil. If you don't have data, that's an opportunity for us, basically. If you don't have data where to produce, where the farmers can get information immediately, perhaps maybe we cannot fulfill it. And in general, what I'm saying is, ICT is an important element for us, for extension. And I can give you a simple example, Meraf can supplement me, in terms of technological importance of the ICT. When we use the voucher system in Amhara region, they were using 2.8 million quintal for one reason, for one season. Do you know, when we introduce this element, now they are using 3.8 million quintal. You see how the difference is? First of all, the technological development. Second, also the what we call it, the drawbacks of the problems that we had before. So it's shortened to use the technology. ICT is an important element for us to use and to move forward. Therefore, a private sector, agriculture is the backbone of the country, and we have to leverage also the problems that we have, the data, the voucher systems that we have already started. And you can understand also the problems that we have right now, fall armyworm. If you don't deliver on time, and to tackle on this problem, will be in crisis Ethiopia as well. Therefore, I think it's a general what I'm saying. I'm not specific for your agenda, but I'm selling myself that agriculture, it needs, it's an infant area. We have to mobilize and use for agricultural transformation. ICT is an important element. For sure, for specific reasons, Meraf can supplement what we are using and where we are now.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Yasu. Maybe trying to frame it in the kind of the way you asked the question earlier in terms of opportunity. So I think maybe I would start with an important point that was made in the panel I was on by Amha, which is Ethiopia actually has invested a lot on the infrastructure side. So I think relative to many East African countries as well, I think our infrastructure base is very strong. So I think now it's time to reap the benefit of that investment and make sure that there's a return to that investment. And I think one important way of returning or getting that return is kind of a successful partnership between the public sector and the private sector, which is already happening. And I think that is what you're also hearing from His Excellency Dr. Debrezion and Dr. Yasu. So if you really think of, for instance, the successful interventions that ATA has done with the ministry, such as the IVR SMS system, the e-voucher, all of which is public sector driven, but could not have been delivered without the private sector. So it is a classic case of a public-private partnership. And I think the opportunity in ICT for me is that there's opportunities for more public-private sector engagement. So, you know, we work very closely with homegrown ICT companies. And I think the opportunity there as well, if you take Kafia, Ecom, Apposite, Paragon, all these are homegrown technology companies. And I think the opportunity I see is the public sector really thinking through what are some of the services that need to be delivered to reach the wider population from the perspective of agriculture, smallholder farmers, and making sure that we're working closely with the private sector to deliver that. I think another opportunity I see is also to make sure that ICT is used to integrate complementarities among sectors. So if I take, for instance, the 2.5 million smallholder farmers that have registered through the IVR system, you know, these households also get health services, they get education services, they get many other services. So making sure that they also don't get 2,000 ICT services is very important, that they actually get a much more integrated service. So maybe it's almost a Lahulu version of the rural community, but where somehow services can come together. But that is an opportunity for ICT also to bring sectors together. Nutrition, if you think about nutrition, that brings education, health, agriculture together. So we're hitting the same households and making sure that ICT is also able to hit these households in a much more coordinated way. I think when we come to the agriculture sector, the ministry and ATA are about to launch an ICT for Ag strategy, because we think that different interventions at the end of the day have to add up to something. So, otherwise you also end up potentially confusing smallholder farmers as well. So making sure that we have an integrated strategy from which the different interventions are drawn from. And then based on those interventions, you can think of, based on that strategy, you can think of intervention, technological intervention, you can think of the regulatory environment, you can think of policies to make sure that these interventions are actually effective, but making sure that we have a much more coordinated approach. So between the ministry and ATA, for instance, Dr. Yasu has championed an ICT for Ag strategy, which will include extension as well. And I think already, maybe to Suyum's point, the IVR SMS system is one tool to reach the extension system or to strengthen the extension system. So we have actually quite a few different interventions, but we have to make sure that these things are tied around a particular strategy and objective. Otherwise, you're going to end up having many systems that may not necessarily be coordinated. So, for instance, the message you send to farmers on disease has to be something that is vetted by, for instance, the Ministry of Research. Otherwise, you're going to tell a farmer to handle a certain disease in a certain way, and if you have another system coming and telling them, you could actually worsen the disease. So I think the opportunity is to really come together around strategy and integrate services. And then maybe finally I would mention just ecosystem. I think this expo itself, has shown that there's a great opportunity to make sure that there's a broader ecosystem that needs to be thought of, and that ICT is not a solution, but part of kind of a menu of solution. And that we shouldn't just hang our hat and say that ICT will solve all our problems, as we don't do for the ag sector.
Fantastic. And I see Your Excellency, Deborah Zion, nodding on the side and in side comments. We're here to support. It's terrific. I want to just draw attention to that. The last several days have been a chance to share examples of success in each sector in ICT contributing to development goals. It's also been a chance to gather some international perspectives from companies, from experts that have flown in to share their views on big ideas and big questions that other countries have either delivered or have been asking. And along those lines, I'd like to invite my colleague Robin, who leads Dahlberg's Global Technology for Development practice. You've worked across more than 20 countries, including across Africa and South Asia, and been asking these kinds of questions and seeing examples of what are big ideas. Are we asking the right questions? Or what are some questions that you might prompt for consideration by this broader group based on your international experience?
Wonderful. Thank you, Jordan, and thank you to all of you for having me here. Just want to first off congratulate you on what is, I think, a very unique and dynamic conversation that's happening, and would love to see these kinds of conversations happening elsewhere in the world with this level of integration between sectors, with the engagement across ministries being led by the ministry. It's a very exciting moment in time. There's also a number of things to build off of. I've been very excited just hearing and continuing to see the kind of innovation that you have here in Ethiopia. So as I offer a few reflections of my own given experience elsewhere, I think there are many aspects of what I've heard just now and from my colleagues over the course of the few days that resonate quite strongly. The first being the recognition that this is a complex question we're asking, which is, how does technology unlock growth? In many ways, technology is a new form of infrastructure. And with it, significant investment that has the potential to do a range of things, unlocking business growth, supporting access to services, and in and of itself driving innovation. But the supply and demand, sometimes we see it as chicken and egg, is something that becomes I've been involved in a number of conversations asking, where do we start? Do we start with the investment in the infrastructure? Do we start with the investments in the products and services? And how do we balance these two? So the first of, I have 4 reflections and perhaps with that some questions for the group. The first was this observation and reflection on the importance of integrating technology, and Maraf, I believe you just mentioned that technology is an enabler, and it's not an end in and of itself. And so how do we get much closer to the question of technology for what? What are we trying to achieve? Some of the work that I've done with a range of large companies, including Google and Microsoft, as well as national governments and city governments who are looking to manage these investments, starts with the question of what are we trying to achieve? And so to give a specific example, one of the worst questions I've heard over the past 10 years was, how are we supposed to, why would we want which is how do investments in technology offset the cost of providing health services, support health workers, and enable the cost savings potentially to be reallocated elsewhere? How do we make the best use of resources? The second dynamic that I've been hearing is one of the realities of access and infrastructure and how to ensure that that is also keeping up with demand. Your Excellency, you mentioned the challenge of reaching rural populations and ensuring that you're able to create that access, but then also fully utilize the services and the infrastructure and access you have today. Access starts with, be it fiber or satellite or GSM mobile phone communication, but it also includes the question of access to devices. It also includes the question of literacy, as you mentioned, and the relevance of content, be it as a language or what is the real value. And as I was hearing about the growth of agriculture, that has been an example in many countries where access to better market pricing, access to better weather information, access to crop information, access to information that creates a more fluid logistics and supply chain management is critical. And so I think we see a number of examples. With that question, just one reflection, a few of the examples that I've seen have started to think about the idea of anchoring on a particular product or service, be it providing weather or market information, if you will. But then how do you open up that channel? So in any case, technology offers a channel, and the provision of information can start with agriculture, can move to healthcare. But how do you think about the opportunity to build, to drive demand for a particular product or service, and then use that channel to start to better understand what else is needed and what is useful? And that's been a part of the work that I've been involved with across a number of countries, Kenya, Nigeria, India, and elsewhere. And I think there's some interesting examples that could be drawn there. The next question that we haven't talked much about this morning is the question of how do you pay for all of this? Who finances it? And recognizing that the cost of this infrastructure is significant. The cost of addressing some of the issues of literacy and access is very involved. And the reality that the value that is derived is not just for citizens, it's not just for government, it's not just for businesses, it's actually for all three, and including our partners in the donor and development communities as well. And so with that, some of the exciting examples that I've seen have started to think about how you can either share the cost of investment across each of those groups, or partner with institutions, companies, organizations to anchor that investment, and then look to relieve the costs over time as different types of value are realized. And so some of the innovative financing mechanisms and innovative partnerships I've seen across the public and private sector, I think it sounds like some of those conversations are already starting, and I think it's an exciting space to be going. And then the final reflection I've had, where I've seen some exciting progressive movement, is the question of how to take these ideas forward and what kind of capabilities are needed. Often the question of a technology strategy and technology investment in a country is placed squarely on the ministry. And I think that's the wrong place to start. And the reason being, this is an enabling opportunity, and the value is going to be realized through agriculture, through healthcare, a bit close to my microphone, through healthcare, through education, and so it's much more of a partnership. And I've seen different countries structuring those relationships differently. So establishing working groups that include healthcare, education, agriculture, but also actively include the private sector as well. And as well, a question was asked this morning about the youth and the innovation community. But how do you create a partnership that is equally both invested, committed, and responsible for delivering on some of these solutions? So if I think about those are just a mix of observations I've had, and I think it's a very exciting, Jordan, as you mentioned, place to be starting, but continuing the conversation and really starting to get into some of the specifics.
And thank you, Robin. I think there's a theme running through the questions that you're posing, which is the theme around collaboration and partnership. You mentioned, how do we open up channels, right? If there is a solution being delivered that is sector-specific, but has opened up a channel for the delivery of other kinds of products or services, that calls for a form of collaboration across different sectors. You mentioned the question of shared costs and financing, and given that a range of different kinds of stakeholders can benefit from an infrastructure investment or a specific solution, then how do we crowd in that investment from those diverse sources? And then the last point you made on how we get started, which is a question of sourcing priorities, in a sense, surfacing needs, and how we work together to craft best the agenda that we can then translate into action. So overall theme of partnership. I might turn this back to our panelists again, and Your Excellency, Dr. Debretsion, you underscored the strong trust that has already accumulated in conversations between the ministry and private sector. And building on that trust, then my question is, in your mind, how do you see best these partnerships being both formed and then leveraged as we go forward? What's your perspective on partnership?
Good. I want you to allow me again to comment on some of the points highlighted right now. And I just want to comment on just financing of the way, we work at times might feel odd from others. For us, regarding infrastructure financing, it is the government who has shouldered the responsibility. And as I was mentioning, even in the rural village, we have all these towers. If you see it from market perspective, it does make sense. It doesn't make sense, meaning you cannot get any profit with all those investments. But if you see it from a development point of view, from poverty alleviation, it makes real sense. And this government is working for development, and our main goal is just to extricate this country from poverty. So any resource that we have under our jurisdiction is mobilized just to do that. So infrastructure is one of the biggest investments, I'm sure you know it, that this government is committing, and will continue to commit on infrastructure. So the question is mainly on services, how we provide these services. So we have to separate both. Regarding infrastructure, the government is fully committed. So we are different, as I said, from other countries, because be it from neighbor and others, infrastructure rollout is also a challenge from finance point of view. In our case, we say that's not the challenge. The government has taken all responsibility on rolling out all infrastructure, telecom, power, water, many other roads, you know what I mean. So that's why I say that's not our issue. Of course, loan, a lot of, there are a lot of burden, financial burden, but that's the commitment from the government. When it comes to service, that is left for the private sector. So we need a helping hand, including on ICT. Telecom, it is a monopoly. We have one operator. That is our policy. And, but as I said earlier, we are investing in the villages because we have an obligation from the government. The whole motto, the whole mission is poverty alleviation, and without ICT, you cannot alleviate poverty. And the most poverty-stricken population is the rural community. That's why we are heading to the rural. It's not, as I said, the return in terms of finance, but the return in terms of development is main guide. So we have to separate, as I said, the service provisioning and infrastructure financing are completely different. From our perspective, the infrastructure is taken by the government, whether it is from our revenue or from it is our loan, we'll do it. It's must. And but services, no. It should be left for the private sector. So that mix, that formula is different, and we have to develop it all together. So any experience cannot fit to the situation we are in, because we have a different policy and we have a different approach. Partly it will make it easier, because as I said, infrastructure is being laid, but the role of the private sector is not there. But the service is the main one. So we have to come with a different formula. We have a different mix. So that's why we are not simply copying experiences, as they are from other countries. Even you cannot simply contextualize, because the context is completely different. So we need our own formula, our own solution. And we have to depend by discussion. That's why, as I said, we initiated these village centers. It's not government. There is no private sector. It is just use. Partly it's employment, but at the same time it is incubating private sector. We are creating. It's a different formula. But we have already started, as I said, but we have to discuss again further, because this is about private sector development. We say there is a missing link, and the government has taken the initiative. So, and in terms of the finance for it, it is the government who is covering. We have covered the infrastructure, but at the same time, the establishment of the centers. We are financing everything, not the computers that they use. The chair they sit in, every table, everything, and the housing. It's a small house, 4x4. That is being invested again by government and the rural communities there, in collaboration. So we are coming, as I say, with a different formula. We need a different formula that works in this political landscape and in the developmental thinking we have, because this is an interventionist government, which is different from others. So, and we are also investing on solar for these centers. You cannot electrify all village at one go. Even we know the challenge on electrification. But we have decided to electrify these centers uniquely by solar panel. You can put it on the top of the roof, and they can energize their system. And by that, they can provide service. But the villages around are in dark. But we are lightening the service centers. Again, it's a different formula. It's a different formula. So finance is a challenge, obviously. But in our case, as I said, government has taken a lot of responsibility because of its policy, but we need the private sector to come in. So I suggest this should be one of the issues that we have to discuss on the way forward. That financing also is not addressed, but it should be addressed. I agree with that. But as I said, there is some initiative from the government, but if we partner, this partnership issue is very critical. And as I said, with the ICT, on the ICT level, on the ICT sphere, well, I was mentioning earlier, the platform we had is not about grievance, I tell you. It's about how we develop this sector. It's about, again, digitizing Ethiopia. And the collaboration, the way I see it, is still in good shape. The spirit we had is very strong in terms of, again, understanding the government's problem and understanding the private sector's problem. And based on that, we have also a plan. Actually, we have outlined the way this collaboration should develop. It should, we have this software development area. So software area is one of the area of collaboration. So we have a very specific agenda. Within this software, we know the situation of our country. We know the situation of the private sector. We know the usage of the government and other challenges. So this is one area where we have identified, and there is also a team from both, from the private sector and from the government, working on addressing the issues on software development and, of course, usage as well. So this is one specific area. So we have one area, one of the collaborations that we have to do is we have to be very specific. We have to be focused. Just general collaboration, it doesn't make any sense. You can meet, like you can discuss, you can have platform, then after everything evaporates. But it has to boil down to specific agenda. So software area is one of the areas that we have identified. Hardware. Again, there is a team. And there are challenges that we have outlined and listed, and we have agreed, by the way, both of us, from the private sector and from the government. We said, yes, these are the problems within hardware category. So what should we do? Let's make study. Even international tour. By collaboration, we have done international tour. Ministry and the private sector. I tell you, most of the financing was covered by the private sector, not we. The government didn't finance such a tour. But of course, there is currently we are covering. So it's reciprocal. You know, the exposure visits, they cover the cost for our team. There is one underway, we are covering. So we reciprocate, even in financing together. So the sense of collaboration, I just want to convey, the spirit. I'm very happy with them. I'm sure they have to explain. I cannot say it on behalf of them, but they know it. The collaboration is so focus on agenda. And we have a regular meeting as well. Quarterly meeting. At times we make it in every 4 months. So we have a scheduled arrangement as if we are working in one office. But it's a collaboration. Actually, this has been there for quite a few years. So that's why I said the trust we have developed is so high. And but we have to, of course, work out on the details. There are solutions that are to be addressed, of course, to be agreed as well among ourselves, and then government has to decide as a ministry in some of the cases, and as Council of Ministers as a body. So there are areas of decision, but we have still identified all these areas. So the collaboration, as I said, must be very specific and focused on agenda, and then there must be working group, regular meetings. There must be progress in decisions as well that influence the business as such. So I think this is in a nutshell, you know, the relationship and the way we want to develop further as well.
And thank you, Your Excellency. I think what you've underscored also is that future partnership, it must be not only tailored to the Ethiopian context, but tailored all the way down to the unique need, the specific priority being addressed at the service level. And that when we think about models for partnership going forward, we should look to those bright spots where partnership is already delivering results on the ground from recent experience. And maybe with that backdrop, I might then ask Your Excellency, Dr. Iyasu, where are those bright spots in your perspective, and where do you see them going forward?
Okay. Thank you. You know, generally what the doctor said that, let me supplement at least what market failure in general means, especially in agriculture, because those people are the right wing for us to move forward, especially in transformation agenda for agriculture. You know, we have what we call it public partnership programs that we have in our institution as well in agriculture. You know, why? Because in our policy we have a program that we call it integration. Without integration, you cannot move forward in agriculture because we need a private sector. We need, you know, different institutions that works in agricultural process, in the development. But there are people who are working, you know, separately, but they are working in agriculture. Therefore, we have a platform right now that calls, you know, joining the whole, what we call it, agricultural transformation agenda, in the umbrella of agricultural transformation agenda. We have a platform that includes NGO, private sector, and farmers as well, and the extension delivery units as well. Those are the platform that helps us to see where is the missing element in terms of you know, collaboration and in terms of move forward in agriculture. Therefore, I think to me, why I came today also, not only to speak that in front of you, but at least to listen to you. This is the first beginning where we can empower the ICT programs. So let's listen to them. Let's just move forward on it. We are in the infant stage still. So, and later on, we'll see how the result will come up. Therefore, I think to me, you know, just I'm not asking, just directly answering your question, but generally what I'm saying is, ICT is an important area. Let me give you a simple example in what we call it, create a traceable society on coffee production. And there is what we call it, there is a variety called Masha coffee production, which was, you know, supplemented by the digital data, and give, you know, to all bodies in the world, and that costs us, you know, the best quality now. Masha is the best one that who earns per ton, you know, in Ethiopia right now. Therefore, to create a traceable society means to create a database, you know, delivery of information to the people who needs that information. Therefore, we lack that one, in fact. So, what I'm to conclude is that, you know, we have already developed, and we have also a collaboration between public partnership in terms of, by the way, the agricultural mechanization. We are looking also in technological development elsewhere. You know, we want to bring back up to our agriculture. Therefore, so we need to move forward basically, and way forward is very important in ICT. That's why we came to discuss with the partnership, and then we'll continue build up discussions. Through discussions, for sure, we'll have, you know, a matured environment for all the government delivers and the private sectors.
Eto Maraf, same question. In your perspective, where have you seen those bright spots? Where do you see them going forward?
Okay, thank you, Jordan. I think maybe just to echo some of the things that's been said. So I think it is important to recognize that the ICT sector is it's an infancy, or it's an infancy stage, and which I think is fine given our stage of development. But I do think, I mean, given to some of the things you're mentioning about innovative financing, shared cost, and so forth, I think the starting place is also to understand to what extent users understand the role of ICT in their lives. Yeah? And I think for us, of course, we look at it from the ag space. If you think about, for instance, in agriculture, when a new variety of seed is introduced, it is demonstrated. Yeah? No farmers don't easily adopt a seed. They have to see, it has to be demonstrated. They have to see that it has some type of yield and that it has an impact on their productivity. I would assume it's the same thing for ICT. So I think when we start talking about things such as innovative financing and so forth, I think we first have to recognize that we're still at an early stage where I think the public sector will always have a huge role. And I think the role of the private sector would be maybe, I think, thinking how it engages and rides on the back of the public sector. So I think we have to be very careful and I think realizing that the larger population still does not yet fully understand, and there's still ways to go. So there's a lot of, I think, need to demonstrate what the impact of ICT is going to be. So I think many of us may understand it because we engage in different ways with ICT, but I think you have to ask who is the end user of ICT services. And again, for me and Dr. Yasu, of course, we're thinking very sector specific. But when it comes to the ag sector, I think your starting point has to be if what you want to use ICT is to reach the farmers, then you have to think of that dynamics. Now, of course, ICT is not only important for farmers, it's important for policymakers because we want to pull information from smallholder farmers. So there's a lot of role that ICT plays in terms of helping us make decisions, particularly that impacts policy. So there the users are different. But I think we have to because I'm always scared when a management consultant says, innovative financing, I worry that if it's going to complicate or make things very complex on how you deliver ICT services to farmers. So I think we have to be very careful and understand how we can leverage the public sector to reach smallholder farmers. Otherwise, you won't be able to scale. Yeah? So in agriculture, I think you will only be able to scale if you ride on the back of the public sector investment and the reach of the public sector. So more than innovative financing, I would think about innovative private sector engagement and trying to leverage, I think, what's been invested in the public sector. And I think that for me, that's where the bright spot is. I think you've heard from Dr. Debretsion that it is, the public sector is keen to engage the private sector. So I think we've got to think, but how that engagement happens have to be thought through. And I think we have to be a bit more creative.
Fantastic. So I'll say a few maybe observations on what I've heard across the discussion so far, and all to say my expression of appreciation to this panel for really extending and deepening the understanding that this group is taking away from the last several days. And so a couple of observations. One is first that this conference and expo is itself a bright spot in celebrating what's being done and celebrating that the dialogue between different kinds of stakeholders. But we should not say that this is the only bright spot. In fact, there are so many other channels for that dialogue ongoing and so many existing initiatives not highlighted or celebrated during this conference that are also ongoing and that provide a kind of momentum for reaching scale, especially the government-led programs that are in place. The second is a reminder that even in the discussions this week, there are additional points to be added to the discussion, right? Key priorities that have surfaced over lengthy previous studies that are being addressed ongoing, but also a number of issues that weren't raised this week but need to be investigated further. In a sense, so this is back to His Excellency Dr. Debretion's point. This is the beginning of a deeper analysis of those issues. And then the third is that, and this goes all the way back to the core objectives of this last several days, to expose, to enable, and to engage. I think what I've heard is an expression of commitment, an expression of goodwill and desire to collaborate across sectors, especially with those private firms already in dialogue with respective ministries and agencies, and to build on that strong relationship as we move forward. So with that, let me invite everyone to give our panelists a round of applause. And in the spirit of engagement and making this a real dialogue, it was suggested by our head moderator that we break for just a 5-10 minute coffee break and then reconvene for some questions from these participants to the panelists seated here and keep that engagement going forward.
Coffee is in the back, huh? Yes. Sorry, you're young enough to jump. Sorry we didn't give you notebooks earlier. Sorry we didn't give you. I know, I've said you design your notebook. So let's please reconvene in 15 minutes. Coffee is inside here in the back. Capital Hotel and Spa is serving it. Please come back in 15 minutes because we don't want to be too late for lunch as well.